and welcome to the Watchman. Well, Iran now effectively controls 4 Arab capitals: Beirut in Lebanon, Damascus in Syria, Sana'a in Yemen, and Baghdad in Iraq. And the Iranian regime is not just on the march across the Middle East. It is developing nuclear weapons and long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that could one day be delivered to the United States. So why is our government so desperate to strike a deal with Iran? And what does all of this mean for our great friend and ally, Israel? Joining me to discuss it today are 2 of my favorite Middle East experts. Yoram Ettinger is a former Israeli ambassador and a foremost authority on the U.S.-Israel relationship. You can find his great work at theettingerreport.com. Also joining us is Sarah Stern. Sarah is the founder and president of the Endowment for Middle East Truth, or EMET, a top national security think tank here in Washington. You can follow Sarah and EMET's work at emetonline.org. Sarah, Yoram, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you. Well, Yoram, I want to start with you. I kind of referenced the Obama administration pressuring Israel in many ways. One of the linchpins of that pressure is Iran, a potential deal there. But I want to start on a positive note. So many times I don't want to say we're gloom and doom with everything going on in the Middle East on this show. We have to bring the truth to people. But tell me the good things right now in the U.S.-Israel relationship that you've highlighted often on your blog, in your articles. Tell me about some of the good things that are happening between the U.S. And Israel and their relationship right now, still.
The reality is that uniquely in the U.S. role in the world, its ties with Israel are not top to bottom, but bottom to the top, namely irrespective of the bad chemistry between the President of the USA and the Prime Minister of Israel. Relationships, cooperation has never been as robust as it is today. As we sit here at this studio, American special operation units are trained in Israel on their way to Afghanistan, as they were on their way to Iraq by Israel's top experts on suicide bombers, car bombs, and improvised explosive devices. As we talk here, there are 250 top American high-tech companies, giants like Intel and Microsoft and Apple and Google and the rest of them, which do have research and development centers in Israel, which develop the cutting-edge technologies of those big-time American companies, which has enhanced American global competitiveness, has increased American exports, expanded American employment, and as we sit here, Israeli intelligence is providing the U.S. Intelligence community with more intelligence on Islamic terrorism than all NATO countries combined, which spares the lives of many Americans and makes Homeland Security that much more robust than without Israeli intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And if you want more, the EttingerReport.com, Yoram outlines the great strategic partnership, really an unbreakable bond, I believe our two countries have.
Absolutely.
And Sarah, you're also doing great work on Capitol Hill with EMET, and you see up close the bipartisan support on both sides of the aisle. Again, obviously tension with the Obama administration, but in Congress, both sides of the aisle, and poll after poll shows the American people, very importantly, overwhelmingly support Israel. So talk about what you see on the Hill in terms of support of Israel.
Well, that's true, Eric. 70% of the American people, according to recent polls, actually do support Israel. And that is irrespective of who the occupant is in the Oval Office. Having had said that, I think we always had a tremendous amount of bipartisan support. I hope it continues. I have to say that President Obama has been flexing his muscles, and he does want party discipline. So it is very difficult, especially after Senator Robert Menendez had crossed him, and you see the indictments that are coming down. And I think it's put a little bit of fear of the Oval Office
the repercussions.
into the repercussions for standing out on the Democrat side of the aisle.
We saw that with Bibi's speech back in March.
Absolutely.
Where some Democrats didn't attend.
That's right.
And you think that's a result of that direct pressure from the Oval Office?
Absolutely. And you know, it was President Obama was able to manipulate this into much more of a big deal than it ever had been. And it's very sad. I think that the support for Israel throughout the United States is robust and sound, and people will listen, legislators will listen to the will of their electorate.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important what we're doing here today, Yoram and Sarah. We're getting the word out to people at home, and we're encouraging people, I believe, on that hand who say, oh my gosh, the U.S.-Israel, the relationship's over. Some people get worried. They see how the Obama administration treats the Israeli government and they're concerned. But the ties remain very strong, but we have to remain vigilant and continue to educate people and kind of sound the alarm about it. And I believe hold the Obama administration accountable for the way they're treating Israel. Yoram, speaking of the way they're treating Israel, in my view, this Iranian nuclear deal that the Obama administration is pushing is a disaster on many levels. I think sometimes, you know, I've given speeches recently and people say, well, what's in this deal? I know it's bad, but why? Can you tell our viewers a little bit why this proposed Iranian nuclear deal is bad not only for Israel, but for America?
I would say primarily for the USA, because as far as Iran is concerned, the US and not Israel is the prime target for potential nuclear capability.
The great Satan.
The great Satan, Israel is the small Satan.
That's
but
right.
more than that, the aim of Iran is to dominate the Gulf and to dominate the Muslim world, where Israel is not a player. Their major obstacle in the way to domination has been the US power projection. And therefore, they want to develop the mega capability in order to remove the mega American obstacle as they view it. Should there be a nuclear Iran, we definitely are going to witness an avalanche of the pro-American Arab Gulf countries, and then further Arab countries, Jordan and Egypt, which would severely undermine American interest, would cause havoc as far as the supply of oil, the price of oil, and therefore also would damage severely the American economy. And nuclear Iran would lend a major tailwind to the few hundred Islamic sleeper cells in this country, with Iran being the central banker of global Islamic terrorism. And certainly a nuclear Iran would make the problematic anti-American regime in Venezuela that much more audacious, anti-American. And what would stop the regime in Venezuela to ask the Iranians to deploy a nuclear suitcase to Caracas, and how difficult would it be to bring it from Caracas to one of the metropolitan areas of the USA? The problem with the current deal is that the current negotiation in Lausanne ignore completely the Iranian track record. We have a track record of the #1 anti-American rogue regime, the #1 terrorist, subversive, human rights violator, supremacist, oppressive, no human rights in Iran, hate education, anti-American hate education in K through 12 in Iran. You have nothing of that in the agreement, namely the US treats Iran as if it was a legitimate
it's an honest
partner,
broker,
partner to negotiation.
The Beirut barracks bombing in '83 never happened. American blood on Iran's hands.
Or currently trying to subvert and topple the Saudi, pro-American Saudi regime, potential takeover of Yemen, potential blocking of the oil routes to the Persian Gulf.
A plot against the Saudi embassy here in Washington in 2011.
Absolutely. And you would have expected the U.S. to precondition all sort of goodies to Iran upon the dramatic change of the nature of the regime. And that, by the way, calls, I think, each one of the viewers here, because they're all constituents, to impress upon their representatives in the House and in the Senate to fertilize and water the seed which was planted by the Corker amendment. Namely, between now and June, when they may conclude an agreement, there should be series of hearings on the Hill discussing the nature of the Iranian regime and integrating it into the final American position on Iran. And not less importantly, the White House has been successful in misrepresenting the military option as if it is a war. But in fact, anyone who removes a military option from the table is inviting a nuclear war.
We'll leave it right there, Yoram. I hate to cut you off, Sarah. We're going to come back to you too. Much more coming up with Yoram Ettinger, Sarah Stern. After the break, we're talking Iran. Stick around. And welcome back. We're talking to former Israeli Ambassador Yoram Ettinger and Sarah Stern, founder of the Endowment for Middle East Truth. We're talking Iran, Middle East, Israel, America. Sarah, this Corker-Menendez bill that Yoram mentioned before we went to the break, sometimes Americans get lost in the weeds a little bit when it comes to laws being made here in D.C. Right. Tell us a bit about that bill, why it's significant. And also, you have an initiative right now with EMET that I want you to tell us about involving Iran. I want you to tell us how we can help you.
Right. Well, the Corker-Menendez, it was originally Corker-Menendez, then because of Senator Menendez's legal issues, it's Corker-Cardin, basically gives the United States Senate 30 days to review the deal.
The Iran nuclear deal.
That means on June 30th, when they finally do have something committed to paper, because there was nothing in the framework agreement that was written down, the U.S. Senate has its responsibility that was granted by the framers of the Constitution to basically review and assent to it. Unfortunately, I do not believe, as many others do not believe, this is enough, because what we need right now is for the Corker-Cardin bill. It was a start because President Obama really wanted to totally ignore the U.S. Senate and Congress and our elected officials. What we need is to look at the Iranian nuclear deal as a treaty. If there was ever anything that would affect not only our lives here in America, the lives of our allies in the Gulf states and in Israel, but also the lives of our children and grandchildren, it is this deal. And we need, as the framers of the Constitution very presciently had established, 2/3 of the Senate to ratify it. So this is extremely important. I think everybody should call into their elected officials. You could get to the Senate switchboard by dialing 202-224-3121, and please ask that this be regarded as a treaty, because it is. If anything should be regarded as a treaty, this is, and it requires 2/3 of the Senate to review and for its advice and consent.
And that's emetonline.org. You see the address on your screen there. You can find out much more about this deal, why it's important and disastrous, in my view. Yoram, before the break, we were talking about, look, a lot of times President Obama, whether he's talking about ISIS or Iran, he says Americans are war weary. We don't want to go to war. We don't want to use the military option. He doesn't say we don't want to use the military option, but hint, hint, we're not going to use the military option. Why is it important to keep that option on the table for the United States when it comes to Iran's nuclear program? And why is that a lot more doable than the Obama administration is leading on?
Well, first and foremost, it's very important to desist from misrepresentation. A military option is not necessarily a war. There are a litany of options for military option before you get to a war. For instance, surgical bombing. When you surgically bomb some installations without ground troops, you are not involved in a war, and this has happened many, many times. Moreover, in 1988, after 8 years of war between Iran and Iraq, with Iran refusing for ceasefire, they finally agreed. Why? Because then President Reagan bombed a number of Iranian installations, and Iran assumed that they were dealing with an American Doberman, not with an American poodle.
Yoram, leave it right there. I hate to cut you off again, my friend. We're going to pick it right back up after the break with Yoram Ettinger and Sarah Stern. Don't move. And And welcome back. We're talking to Yoram Ettinger and Sarah Stern. Yoram, I hated to cut you off before the break. You're making a crucial point. Pick up on that point you were making about the importance of showing strength to this Iranian regime.
When you carry a big stick and reflect willingness to use it, you deter aggression. You prevent war.
Peace through strength.
When you do not carry a big stick, or when you remove the big stick, a military option from the table, you only intensify, you fuel aggression, you fuel radicalism, in this case, on the part of Iran. And therefore, those who remove a military option from the table, they are going to bring about a nuclear war. And a military option means, for instance, a potential of bombing of Iranian installations surgically with no troops on the ground, no
That's
wars.
the key point. You don't need ground troops to do this.
During the 1980s, President Reagan bombed Libyan installations. That put an end to Libyan active role in international terrorism, because the Libyans realized we are dealing with an American marshal who is willing to use his gun, not with an American policeman who has retired his gun. The same thing with the assumption that the White House has reflected that supposedly the Iranians, just like the Soviets, are aware of mutual assured destruction. They may have 10 nuclear warheads, America has thousands, and therefore Iranians would be deterred. The Soviets were deterred by mutual assured destruction. The apocalyptic Iranians do not consider mutual assured destruction as a burden. They consider it as an inducement to get faster to the goal, to meet with their God after bringing havoc upon the so-called infidel Americans.
Key point, Yoram. Thank you so much. The Iranian ideology is what fuels all this at the end of the day. The terrorism is a tactic driven by the ideology, and it's apocalyptic, it's a messianic ideology, an end times ideology that they shape policy around.
Absolutely.
Sarah, talk a little bit more about, you're on the Hill frequently, you're around lawmakers. Is there a lack of a grasp, I guess you would say, of the ideology? I mean, people know, look, this terrorism is dangerous. But do people on the Hill, our lawmakers, really get the ideology that fuels it all?
Some do and some don't. It's really hard to generalize, but I do feel I'd like very much to dovetail onto some of the things that Yoram said so well. One is, ever since April 2nd, when President Obama appeared in his Rose Garden and took the war option off the table, we have seen how Iran has been flexing their muscles. We saw how the Mars Tigris, the Marshall Islands cargo ship, was commandeered by Iranian IRGC members. We've seen very belligerent statements. Hassan Salami, who is the deputy commander of the IRGC,
the Revolutionary Guards Corps,
just said, basically, we welcome the opportunity. We welcome the opportunity to defeat America. We are at war with America.
And this is a top official of Iran's elite Revolutionary Guards Corps, the tip of the spear of the regime.
The recent arrest of human rights activists. There is a wonderful woman, Mohammadi, who has been in charge of human rights, and as Sakharov had always said, if you want to know the foreign policy of any country, look at the way they treat their dissidents. And Jason Raisin, who was a Washington Post columnist, had recently had charges trumped up against him. And now they say he's been spying on Iran for the United States on espionage. All of this stuff.
Pastor Saeed, who's
Pastor
who
Saeed.
we talked about here in the show too, and what they're doing in Yemen. Iran is on the march. They're basically making Yemen a vassal state, or they're trying to, through the Houthis.
Right. So what we are doing is we are empowering the beast. And I'd like to quote Winston Churchill, who said, who feeds the crocodile is only eaten last.
I think that's a great way to end it. We got to wrap it here. Sarah Stern, Yoram Ettinger, thank you so much. And man, I love quoting Churchill. That's a good way to go. That's a man who realized and saw the gathering storm. We need that today. So EMETonline.org, the EttingerReport.com. Find their great work and get in the ear of your lawmakers. That's one big lesson today. And after the break, thank you, Yoram, Sarah.
Thank you.
After the break, find out how you can join the Watchman in Israel later this year. Stick around. I'll be helping to lead the Dateline Jerusalem tour of Israel from November 3rd to the 13th, 2015. And I want you to join us. Now, Chris has been based in Jerusalem for 15 years as CBN's Middle East Bureau Chief. During that time, he has covered all of the major events in the Middle East, and he's also been my trusted guide on many trips to Israel. So it's going to be a blast to team up with Chris to lead our tour together later this year. Now, if you've never been to Israel, let me tell you, it is a life-changing experience. There is nothing like walking throughout the Holy Land in the footsteps of Jesus and the prophets and seeing the Bible come to life before your very eyes. Not only will our tour take you to all of the important biblical sites, Chris and I will also give you a unique perspective on the security challenges facing Israel and what it all means for us here in America and for the future. Bible prophecy. The tour is being run by Inspiration Cruises and Tours, the top Christian travel management company in the business. So this is all going to be first class. Count on it. You can find all the information on how to sign up for the trip by going to the webpage that you see right there on your screen. There's also a video at that link where Chris will tell you much more about this epic experience. Folks, my first trip to Israel changed my life. You may have heard me talk about it here on the show. Once you go, you are never the same. So join us from November 3rd to the 13th, 2015, 10 days in the land of Israel, the Holy Land. I would love to break bread with you later this year in Jerusalem for such a time as this. So from the Watchman, God bless you, and remember, never hold your peace.